Hello, I am here to talk about the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the TikTok ban. So, the Supreme Court has decided to uphold the TikTok ban, which will either force TikTok to divest or be banned. They either want them to sell to an American company or not exist in the United States anymore. I wanted to make a video about this because, in my opinion, the TikTok ban is just one example out of many of the ways that the United States is trying to win this Cold War with China. China is today what the Soviet Union was to the United States in the 1940s and 50s. A lot of people have seen through this ridiculous attempt at banning TikTok for national security reasons as what it really is, which is repressing American free speech. And what I think is really interesting is that the United States government has told us time and time again that one of the reasons that Americans are supposed to be so against China is because China is an authoritarian dictatorship, because it has a firewall, because Chinese citizens can't use Google, Facebook, Twitter without using a VPN. And now we see that the United States government is in fact doing that exact same thing. They will no longer be able to criticize China on the basis of restricting its own citizens' free speech because it's doing that exact same thing by banning TikTok because it is owned by a Chinese company. The other aspect of hypocrisy that comes in, it's like, if we ban TikTok because it's owned by a Chinese company, should all other countries in the world whose data, citizens' data, we're collecting through Facebook, Twitter, etc., should they ban our social medias as well? Or is it only us that gets to do that? The other thing is that this is really interesting timing because Joe Biden has said that in the last few days of his administration, he is not going to uphold the TikTok ban, and Donald Trump has said that he is going to hashtag save TikTok. So we're not exactly sure what's going to happen because Biden said that his administration isn't going to enforce the ban, and then once Trump gets into office on the 20th, we'll see. We don't know. That might be the only good thing that he does. The TikTok ban is emblematic of a larger problem within American society and American government, which is that the American government wants Americans to hate China for some reason. I think they're embarrassed because they're beating us in everything. They want Americans to hate China, right? But they only keep giving Americans reasons to hate America, right? To hate their own government. In the case of TikTok, it's not China that's restricting our access to TikTok, it's the American government. The reasons that the Americans are supposed to have hostility towards China is because China is, this is according to the American government, undemocratic, because China is a communist regime. They love that communist regime. The difference between a government and a regime is basically just if you don't like them or not. So you like them, it's just a government, this person's administration. You don't like them, the communist regime. So they don't want us to like it because it's a communist regime and because, oh, the human rights violations. We can't forget about the human rights violations. The hypocrisy to me is glaring because everything that the United States accuses China of, we have done or are doing. One of the examples of hypocrisy, especially when it comes to the human rights violations, is the United States government hasn't talked about this as much as they used to. I don't know why it's gone quiet, but there was a lot of fuss made around China's treatment of its ethnic minorities, especially the Uyghur Muslims. So the United States alleged that China was committing a genocide against the Uyghur Muslims. What is interesting about this is not whether or not China was actually doing that. What is interesting about this is that the United States, actively as we speak today, is enabling a genocide against the Palestinians, another predominantly Muslim group. But the United States now wants to be the savior of Muslims around the world, pointing the finger at China and saying, well, you shouldn't treat your ethnic minorities that way. If you wanted to maintain human rights around the world, you should start at home, right? And make sure that you and your government are not complicit in the killings of any Muslims, worldwide. Of course, the United States does not have a great track record when it comes to defending Muslim human rights, whether that be the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. So really, we're the last people who should be telling people how they should be treating other ethnic minorities, right? Not to mention the United States' problems with its own ethnic minority groups, right? The history of the United States supporting apartheid at home and abroad. Ring any bells? The way that the United States has treated its black, its native populations. The last ones who should be pointing fingers at anyone, right? It's not whataboutism. It's not, oh, China is committing a genocide. Oh, well, what about the United States? No. The point is, you cannot criticize other countries on the basis of things that your country is actively doing and actively contributing to. It just doesn't make sense. Not to mention that the American government is being held accountable by the American people, the people who voted these people into government. The Chinese government cannot be held accountable by the American people. And this leads into the second problem, which is that the United States, in its hubris, assumes that the Chinese people are too much of a, I suppose, a hive mind to be able to deal directly with their own government. And if you bring up that critique, they'll tell you, the American government, well, they don't like their government, but they can't do anything about it because if you say something negative about Xi Jinping, he shows up to your doorstep and shoots you right there. And it's just like, the reason that they're able to maintain this level of ridiculous propaganda is because the majority of Americans do not have interactions with Chinese people, you know, on the mainland, I guess, if you want to say. Not that, you know, the United States is like China's Hawaii, but I just mean like they don't talk to Chinese people about their government, you know, Chinese people who live in China. And it's just like, it's not the place of Americans living in the United States to tell Chinese people that their government sucks. I'm sure considering that there's a billion of them, I'm sure that there's some Chinese people who feel that their government sucks, and there's some Chinese people who feel like their government is great. But it's not going to be people who have no interaction with that government that are going to swoop in with the savior complex and be like, no, don't worry guys, like we got this. We need to perfect what's going on here first, right? And a lot of people care about this TikTok ban because they really like the app. They use it, you know, every day. Personally, my screen time is probably going to go down like crazy, and I actually have things that I need to accomplish. So in my personal life, it's probably going to have a positive impact. But societally speaking, it's emblematic of this crazy propaganda, this anti-China propaganda that's going on. It's like, why is it better for Facebook, for right-wing Mark Zuckerberg and right-wing Elon Musk to have my data than, you know, President Xi and the Communist Party? The other question is, why is it better for American companies to be able to steal American data, right, over Chinese companies stealing American data? National security risk, they say. Is it? Is it a national security risk? And the other question is, what kind of data does TikTok collect that other Chinese companies, like Shein, for example, are not collecting? These are questions that need answers. This Supreme Court, it has just been L after L. And we knew this was coming. And so it's such a shame. And even for the Biden administration to say that, oh, they're not going to implement it, why not? Why not? You signed it into law. Now you see the backlash, it's, oh, we're not going to implement it because he doesn't want to have, you know, people mad at him in the last couple of days of his administration. He's done more in the last 2 weeks of his administration than he did the rest of the 4 years. Let me be quiet. Infrastructure. The infrastructure plans, guys. He did a lot with the infrastructure. Okay, thank you. The insulin. 15 whatever cap. What is it? $20 cap? $15 cap on insulin? Okay, Biden. As an aside, Mark Zuckerberg going full-on mask-off right-wing MAGA? No, actually, I didn't see that one coming. I did not see that one coming. When Elon Musk went MAGA, no, that was obvious. He was raised in apartheid South Africa. Who thought that a man who was a white man who was raised in apartheid South Africa would not be racist? No, I saw that one coming from a mile away. But Mark, I didn't expect this from Mark. And it's actually sad how he tried to make it seem like in his little video where he's wearing his little gold chain, he tried to make it seem like this decision is, you know, due to anything else than just the Trump administration. But what's crazy is that you're licking the boots of a man who said that he wanted to send you to jail. Maybe that's why he's doing it, because he's afraid. But it's just like, okay, so he said, no more fact checking. We want the community notes. Why have people who are fact checkers as a job when you can have random bitches on the internet coming together and deciding what's the truth? Makes sense? That makes sense to me. And then, on top of the no fact-checking, we also have DEI is done. DEI is dead. Now, we saw this coming because we're in an anti-DEI age. Like, the DEI is the new, you know, calling somebody the N-word, basically. And so, kind of saw that one coming, but it's like, so no more DEI, no more, you know, checks. Now, apparently, on Meta platforms, Facebook, Instagram, you can call people mentally ill for being transgender, things of that nature, right? So they basically just shifted to make the platform more conservative. Okay, Mark. Okay. And watch him end up in jail anyway. That's the thing. It's like, I don't know why people in Trump's inner circle try to do this, where they'll be like, oh, like, he won't do it to me. Like, if I give him $1 million at his inauguration party, he won't do it to me. You saw what he did to his own vice president? He was cheering on the crowd that was yelling, hang Mike Pence! Hang Mike Pence! You're next! You're next! And it's crazy how fast our government can move on shit that doesn't matter and is not important whatsoever. Like, all of this rah-rah being made about TikTok, right? About TikTok and having it, you know, it needs to sell, it's a national security issue, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, healthcare prices still high. Americans still living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, job market trash. Can we address some of the real issues instead of going back and forth over nonsense? My message to the American people is that China has not done anything to us. Personally. To us. They haven't done anything. Okay? If anything, Chinese people who live in China have more of a right to hate Americans because the United States was behind, you know, flooding China with opium with like all of the rest of those Western countries. We were right there cheering it on as people were dying in the streets because of opium overdoses. That's the history. That's the history of the situation, I fear. And the United States government doesn't even have to do that much to convince Americans to hate China, because calling it the Chinese Communist Party already, the strong association that Americans have with communism, the strong negative association, it's like you don't even have to say anymore. For them, if it's the Chinese Communist Party, by definition, they must be evildoers doing evil across the world, etc., etc. And of course, in the same way that, you know, relations between the United States and African countries have been soured by just blatant racism, this is the same way that the United States treats China, because going back to the idea of this hive mind, like that the people themselves, they're either brainwashed or they're afraid, they can't speak up, they can't hold their own government accountable, they have no mechanisms to communicate with their government and their, you know, representatives. It calls back to this racist idea that Chinese people in general, like, they're all the same. You know, the racist idea is that they all look the same, they all think the same, they have the same opinions, they get up, like, it's 1984, like, they all get up at the same time, you know, they do the same thing. There can't be that kind of diversity in the population, because then it challenges the idea of whether or not they need Americans to come save them. The police of the world, if you will. It's honestly irritating because, especially with traditional media in the United States, like the New York Times, for example, there's such an anti-China slant, an anti-China bias, where it's like, even if China does something that is, like, good, they'll find a way to make it seem like they did it for nefarious reasons. Like, for example, China building infrastructure in Africa, building roads, building bridges, building, airports. When American media reports on it, they're like, Chinese debt trap, keeping African countries in debt. And it's like, wait, but isn't that what we do? With like the IMF and the loans? So it's like, okay, the United States, you know what they say? When you point one finger, you got three pointing back at you or whatever, because the United States, it's like, you did the same thing. You did the exact same thing. Except y'all don't even build shit. You don't even build roads. You don't even build bridges. That's what I'm saying. It makes no sense. You have these high interest rate loans, and African countries don't even get anything out of it. So it's like, I think that if African countries feel like they're being taken advantage of by China, they can deal with that. But this is just the constant geopolitics of the United States, that no one can actually deal with anything. No country other than the United States has any agency. And so if something bad is happening, it's because the countries don't understand that they're being taken advantage of, and the United States needs to intervene. It's just like, we have so many problems that we could be dealing with. The list is long. The list is lengthy. Yes? The list of our problems is long and lengthy, and China is not one of those problems. This is just my interpersonal projection on what's going on with the United States and its obsession with China, but I genuinely do believe that the United States is mad and has been angry for a long time that instead of staying poor and decrepit, China has now gotten to a place on the world stage where not only is it competing with the United States, but it's actually edging out the competition, and they're so bitter and frustrated about that they try every which way to diminish China's success and make it seem like any success that they do have is because of the totalitarian, authoritarian 1984 style government. And you have, Americans on TikTok who are seeing Chinese people living their lives the way that they normally do, doing things, basic things, like going to the grocery store and going to restaurants. And there are people who are saying, oh my God, I had no idea that they had parks, restaurants, grocery stores in China just like us. And it just goes to show the level of ignorance that Americans have when it comes to China. Because to be surprised that China has apartments and parks, but it's not, that mistake and that misinformation is not created in a vacuum. It's to the benefit of the United States for Americans to believe that life in China is basically a nightmare, is some type of dystopian, terrible life. What will they do? They can't access Instagram. Except the mask is falling off. The truth is being unveiled, because at the end of the day, if the United States government was telling us that we shouldn't, admire them, we shouldn't look towards them because they have all these negative things, like not being able to access American social media, now we are not going to be able to do that same thing. So what does that say about our government and our quality of life? All in all, things are not going great for the United States. We have the anti-China propaganda ramping up. We have Trump's government coming in. All of those appointments I have been watching. Those congressional hearings, shameful, disgusting. Donald Trump 4 more years. Yeah, no, it's gonna be a long 4 years. And even more unfortunately for me, I actually had a bit of a following on TikTok. And now it's all gonna be gone, so that's really a shame. That's honestly all I had to say about the TikTok ban, American hypocrisy, the anti-Chinese propaganda, and Trump's inauguration. So the next time that you see me, Trump will be president, and God bless America.